Hello, sewing students! I hope this video finds you well. Today, we're going to finish sewing our house pillow. There are 3 steps that I'm going to show you. The first step is sewing the doors and windows to the body on the sewing machine. The second step is sewing the parts of the house together on the sewing machine. And the third step is stuffing the house with polyfill and hand sewing the hole closed. Are you ready to start? I am. Let's go. Okay, so now I have my 2 windows and a door, and I've already laid them out on my fabric. So I'm going to position the windows 3/4 of an inch from the top of the fabric. So use your ruler and make sure that you're at least 3/4 of an inch from the top. So I'm just making sure I did that correctly. And then you want to have 1.5 inches between your 2 windows. So I'm using my ruler and I'm just kind of eyeballing and using the ruler to get my 1.5 inches. And I have to be at least 3/4 of an inch from the edge on this side as well, so that we have plenty of room to make our seam allowance. And then I'm just going to take my pins and I'm putting 1 pin in the center and then another pin diagonal through the center to hold it tightly in place, and doing the same thing on this side, and the same thing again. And the door, we want to make sure that it is 3/4 of an inch from the 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of the fabric. And I'm just kind of eyeballing where it is in the center. It looks good. And I'm probably going to use, first I pin the center, that anchors it, and I'm going to use a few more pins around the top edges. Make sure that you iron your fabric if it's wrinkled. Mine wasn't wrinkled, and my felt doesn't really wrinkle, so I didn't need to, but if you do, make sure everything's ironed and nice and flat. Remember, the flatter it is, the easier it is to sew. So I'm done pinning, and now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew it. Sewing on the window to the body. So what you're going to do is start and I like to start in the top right corner, and I'm sewing 1/8 of an inch from the edge of my fabric, and then I'm just going to do the pivot. You guys all know how to do that. Leave your needle in, so you sew to the corner about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and then you leave the needle in and you lift the foot and pivot. And again, I'm sewing 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. I'm going to stop 1/8 of an inch from the top with my needle in, lift the foot, and turn the fabric. And now I'm sewing all the way to the edge to finish my square. And I'm going to back stitch, always back stitch. Lift the foot, I'm pulling out my fabric and I'm trimming all my threads. I didn't even need to take out the pins because they were in the center and they weren't in my way. My embroidery thread knot is showing. I was trying to tuck it under and it didn't hide, so I'm just going to cut that off. So I don't need the knot anymore because I sewed the window down, so I just cut that off. So there's the first window. I'm not going to show you the other one. It's the same process. You'll start in the corner on the right hand side, and you'll make a square with your sewing machine needle 1/8 of an inch from the edge. I'm going to go ahead and show you the door. I'm going to start again on the right side and put my needle in the top corner 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and I'm going to pull out my pin. I'm going to go ahead and back stitch and sew straight down 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Pull out my other pin. When I get to the corner just about 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to pivot with my needle in, and I'm going to take my pin out. Trying to keep a nice straight line, and I'm going to actually make one more stitch just with a hand crank, pivot. I'm gonna take out my pin, go all the way to the corner. One more hand crank, pivot and turn. It helps to pull the threads out of the way so you don't sew over them. And then back stitching at the edge. And then you just pull it out gently and trim your threads and you're done with the door. I always keep my scissors and my pin box right next to me at the sewing machine. That way you have all your tools and everything right next to you. So there we have it. We have the door finished and our one window. And we're ready for the next step. All right, now that we've finished sewing on the windows and door, we're gonna sew the roof on. So I have 2 bodies and 2 roofs. So I'm gonna show you how to pin the roof on. That's our first step. So I have right sides together. This is the right side of my roof that I want showing and the right side of my house. So I'm gonna line up right sides together. So I'm gonna sew this edge right here. So when I open it up, it looks like this. So it looks like a house. So right now I'm lining up my edges. Remember, we always want our edges to be matched perfectly, corner to corner, just like this, right sides together. I ironed both of these pieces just now. So make sure you iron everything. This is your last chance to iron it before it gets sewn together. And I'm pinning down the edge. I like to put my pins at an angle, as most of you know, and I'm putting them about 1 inch apart. The fabric's not very slippery, so you don't need that many pins. One more pin and then I'll be done. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pins. When you sew this 1/2 inch seam allowance right here, you open it up and it's gonna look like that. So you're gonna go ahead and pin both of them. You're gonna pin this roof to this side as well. And now we're gonna take them to the sewing machine and sew them. So I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I want you guys to either use a piece of tape. Most of you already have tape on your machine. Put your tape right here and measure the distance from your needle to the tape. And then you line up your fabric against the tape. Or you can use your ruler and draw in a line for yourself. But you guys need to do that so you can have a nice straight line. I'm gonna eyeball it. Always backstitch at the top and the bottom. So I'm sewing my nice 1/2 inch seam allowance and backstitching at the top and the bottom. And don't forget to either draw in your 1/2 inch seam allowance line with your chalk and a ruler, or put a piece of tape, and I backstitch at the end, put a piece of tape on your sewing machine to use as your guide. And that's it. I'm going to trim my threads. Always trim your threads so it'll be nice and neat at the top and at the bottom. And then now I'm going to go over to the ironing board and I'm going to press this seam open. So you want to have a nice hot iron and you're going to just press that seam open nice and flat like this, and press it again from the right side as well. Then you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance on your second roof and go press the seam open as well. And that's it for this step. Okay, so I finished sewing both of my seams here, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I ironed them open. What I want you guys to do now is take your scissors, and you see how this corner's poking out like that? Well, we don't want it to be like that. You're just gonna trim it so that it's flush to the roof. And I'm just trimming this one, the edge of the seam allowance, a little bit too. Be careful you don't trim your body. So again, I'm just trimming that off. You don't have to trim that one. We can leave that one there. So, so now we have nice, even edges to sew. So I'm going to take both of my houses, my front and my back, and I'm going to put them right sides together, like we always do when we're sewing two pieces together. and I'm gonna pin the entire house together. So we're going to leave an opening right here. So here's my door on this side, and I'm gonna leave an opening about 4 inches wide so I can put my hand in through the hole to stuff it. So I'm going to pin along this side of the door. I'm gonna start. I'm making sure all my corners are matching and all my edges are matching. And I'm just gonna pin around the house. Easy peasy, easy as can be. So I'm gonna pin all the way around the house, just like this, and leave that 4-inch opening at the bottom of the house where the door is. It's easiest if you have the opening at the bottom of the house where the door is, because when we hand sew it together, it won't show as much. If you have that hand sewn hole somewhere else on the side of the house or on the roof, it might show, and so we want to hide that. So I'm just pinning all my edges together all the way around, and after I finish pinning all of this, I'm going to sew it on the sewing machine. And that's our next step. So now we're going to go over to the sewing machine. You're going to finish pinning all the way around the house, just like this, and stop right here to leave your opening. So again, pin all the way around your house, and then stop right here so that you have an opening. Now it's time to go. So I'm at the sewing machine and positioning my needle and my fabric. So this time we're not going to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you'll need to use your ruler to draw that in, or again, use your tape, but you'll need to reposition your tape. So you measure from the needle right here to the tape. Use my ruler like this, a 1/4 inch, and you'll mark it with your tape. You guys should already know how to do that. I always backstitch the beginning and the end. And again, I'm just sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance this time. I know we never do that. And I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch from the edge, and I'm going to do the pivot. And go around. The reason why we're doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance is because we're not going to press the seam open because we won't be able to actually get to it. So we're just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We won't waste fabric, and it will look better and lay better. When I get up here to the roof, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to leave my needle in and pivot so I can make that edge. Back stitching at the very end, and I'm remembering to leave my opening, and I lift up my needle and pull it out, and I'm done sewing the house together. Now we're going to go stuff it. This is the exciting part. We're going to turn the house right side out. I'm just clipping off the corners here. You should do that so that when you turn it right side out, you can get sharper corners. So I'm going to clip those corners off. And now the moment of truth, we get to turn it right side out. And it takes a little bit of working with your hands. If you need to get a pencil, you know, the eraser side of the pencil can work really well. I'm going to grab mine. To help you push out all your corners. So we didn't have to iron this because it's not possible to get in there once you've sewn this up. So all you have to do is just push these out. Once we're done doing this, actually I do want you to go to the iron after you're done punching this out. Because at the iron you can press these corners out. So I want you guys to go to the iron and just press these corners out. I'm not going to do it right now, but I'll have you guys just press that out like that and give this a little press too. It'll just help flatten the house out so it has a better shape. My little rooftop isn't cooperating, so I'm going to push him a little bit more. Sometimes if you trim the seam allowance down a little more, then you can get it flatter. But once we stuff it, it should be fine. Okay, so isn't that cute? Now we get to take the stuffing. I'm using the polyfill. If you don't have it polyfill, then go ahead and take some cotton balls, or you could tear up old dish towels. It helps to take small handfuls at a time, because if you get too big of a handful, then it's hard to push out all the I didn't make my opening big enough, so I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bigger for my hand. So it's kind of fun. You just keep stuffing it. If you have some chopsticks at home, that works really well. To push it and push all the stuffing into place. And it's really up to you and your own creativity on how full you want it to be. If you want it to be really firm, or if you want it to be a little soft, it's up to you. And then I like to push it into all the corners. Just like that. And you could keep adding some more if you wanted to. Get it up there into the roof real tight. All right, I think that's pretty good. So now the last step is to close up your hole. So unfortunately I had to make my hole really big because of my hand being on the bigger side. Hopefully you guys with your smaller hands won't have as much trouble. So I'm going to just trim these little threads off here. And what I did is I threaded my needle with a single thread, so I have a tail that's like 4 or 5 inches long here, and I knotted it at the end, And I just hide my knot inside the seam allowance like this, and I tuck it inside and hide it. And then you literally are just taking your needle and you're kind of like sewing up a wound like a surgeon would and going back and forth over through the fold. I folded the edges of the fabric down, the seam allowance down, so that I have a nice folded clean edge. And then I'm just taking a little bit of each side of fabric and pulling the thread through. Oops, we're losing some light, but that's okay. That happens. I think you guys can still see. So you'll just keep doing this in and out. I like to make the stitches really close and tight. And then when you're done, you'll finish with a knot at the end. And you'll have your finished house, just like this. All right. That was lots of fun. Now I have 2 of these houses. Cool, huh? Well, that was really fun. I'm glad you guys did this project with me. I hope your houses turned out well. Please email me some photos of your finished product. I want to see how you did. And I'm looking forward to having live chats with you guys coming up soon on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. at our normal class time. So get ready for next week. I'll have another project for you next week, and I'll be letting you know. I'll let you know more about it soon. Thank you. Bye.